Clotilda, as the last slave ship, is certainly one of the most consequential shipwrecks I've ever been involved with, and it profoundly affected me and still has meaning. I mean, the pain of those descendants, the pain of those who went through that ordeal is magnified so many fold when you begin to understand thousands of ships for hundreds of years and millions of people. I'll never get over that.
Welcome back to Fascinated by Shipwrecks with our special guest, James Delgado. It has been great to have Jim here for the first 3 episodes of this podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking to Jim about his career. So thanks again so much, Jim, for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure. Always good to join you.
So you seemed quite destined for this field of work. Tell us sort of when that moment you knew that this is what you wanted to do.
There's 3 threads in my life that I think influenced me. The first was that for the first years of my life, I was raised by my grandparents. And I can't underestimate the impact that had on me. I had a very young mother, and Mom had her parents raise me until I was basically 5. I grew up with a different set of values, perhaps, than I might have had I been raised with a more age-appropriate set of folks. So much of what you are is formed in those early years. And so to some degree, I'm a man out of time. I have a number of values and perceptions that are from a generation before. My mother was a teenage mom, I should explain. So with that, I mean, when my mom married my dad when I was 5, I then became part of a very loving family, and that loving family also included having a boat. My grandfather had a boat. And so from early on, that grandfather with his boat and my other grandfather, who'd raised me until I was 5 with his fishing boat, certainly had me exposed to the water, mostly lakes, but also to some extent to the sea. Take that and then a fascination with the past. And growing up in what today is Silicon Valley, but back then was orchards and hay farms and ranches in tiny little San Jose that suddenly blossomed, not figuratively, but literally from an agricultural town to being a high-tech center. That meant lots of freeways, lots of development from shopping malls to track homes. And with that, the past began to emerge, literally in our own backyard. So watching that happen in the absence of any laws to protect or preserve and seeing literally hundreds of human burials from the indigenous Ohlone people being scooped up in bulldozer blades or drilled through as pilings were being put in to erect houses was shocking, having already been introduced to this entire concept of the past, thanks to my 5th and 6th grade teachers who inspired me with a love of Egypt, Rome, Greece, and of course the Maya and the Aztecs. All of that was just amazing. And suddenly here's the past, literally, like I said, in my own backyard. So I went out to start to rescue that with my archaeologist's handbook, which my mother had bought me, with my own kit to salvage and recover. And ultimately, I rescued over 100 out of 1,000 burials. And those folks were all reinterred by the descendants of the Ohlone people. That catapulted me into archaeology. And I thought that I would remain in prehistoric and some historic period archaeology until in 1978, with the National Park Service having just joined, my first assignment was to watch the ship Niantic from the California Gold Rush emerge from landfill at Clay and Sansom Streets, right next to the towering Transamerica Pyramid. And with that, as anybody new to San Francisco would marvel at, the fact that 12 blocks from the bay had once been the beach. And so here's this ship, and here's everything perfectly preserved, sealed in mud. And my path changed dramatically into the maritime world, followed by being assigned to the historic ships at Hyde Street Pier, where I had a hands-on education in handling and working on ships and getting to know maritime life, but then also apprenticing in my own way at the San Francisco Maritime Museum, where the old hands, the founder, Carl Kortum, the curator, Harlan Soten, Harry Dring, the superintendent of the ships, Dave Hull, the librarian, all of them really were inspirations in teaching me more about the maritime world. And from then, well, my course was set and I have sailed that global ocean ever since.
Interesting chain of events that happened that put you on that path, because could have gone any other way, but maybe you might have still become a land archaeologist if you were that taken with archaeology anyway.
I mean, I still love land archaeology. I've enjoyed my trips to Egypt and to Greece and to Rome and into the jungles. I've climbed down pyramids, both Egyptian and Mayan. I've explored lots of sites. I thrilled getting an insider's tour of Stonehenge. I mean, all of
Mm.
those things still appeal to me. But it's the maritime world that I've placed my scholarly focus and much of the outreach that I've done ever since.
So what does it mean to be an explorer? We see documentaries about the ancient ruins around the world. What is it about exploration that keeps you thriving and happy in what you do?
Well, let's start by addressing this question of exploration. And I think it's an important thing. Actually, I think we all need to be explorers. People oftentimes think that exploration means finding something that no one else has ever seen, and that does happen. But for the most part, in so many ways, in so many places, what we've seen, what I've had an opportunity to participate in the discovery of, and you saw me use quotes there, doesn't mean that other people hadn't been there, hadn't seen it. Maybe they didn't quite know the identity or get its importance to people outside of their own community. But there's very little that hasn't been seen by others unless you're talking about somewhere out in space or deep in the ocean. So exploration really is, I think, a personal path that we all take to learn more if you're so inclined. For me, exploration has been moving beyond the boundaries of, my neighborhood in Edenvale, that tiny little part of San Jose, to all of San Jose, to Santa Clara County, to the San Francisco Bay Area, to the Western Coast, to the entire United States, and then ultimately the world. And in each place, my personal voyage of exploration has been one in which I've learned two fundamentally important things about exploration. The first is to always go with an open mind and an open heart and open eyes, and with not just an interest in, but a capacity to learn. The other part of it, and I think this is an important part, is it's not really exploration if you don't come back and tell others about it or write about it. And so that's why through the years I've written my books, the articles, given lots of talks, and ultimately spent 20 years seriously in documentary television. And by saying seriously, I mean like working on a series as opposed to one-offs and things of that sort, because I've always been interested in the sharing. Just ask any one of my friends or my family, particularly my poor mom with a teenage, much more excitable me, coming back and saying, "Oh, you would not believe what we saw today. 3 burials all in a row." And poor woman at dinner, and she's just going, "Is that mud under your fingernails?" "Yeah." "From digging up dead people?" "Yeah." "Go wash your hands." So yes.
Very auspicious beginnings flourished into such an exciting and lengthy career for you. So, what have been some of the challenges and obstacles you've had to overcome along the way?
Challenges and obstacles are always there for all of us. I think what allows you to take measure of yourself and others to take measure of you is how you deal with those obstacles. Younger me would try to headbutt my way through. Older me tries to find a path that guides you to that place. But the most important lesson in terms of obstacles that I learned a long time ago is that you're not alone, and that those journeys are best made with others, and that everybody brings something to the mission, to the job, to the exploration, or in the old parlance, to the table. Isn't that what the Lord of the Rings is all about? After all, it's a fellowship. I've always enjoyed working with others. And with that, the other thing that I think can form an obstacle is when one person or one group wants to take everything It's like, okay, we want all the credit, or we want to be the only ones that talk about or write about this. The best projects I've been on and the projects that I do have all been inclusive and sharing. And I think that's the only way to go. I mean, otherwise, you're just feeding self-interest by others. And self-interest is not what it's not what my field needs. It's not what our society needs. It's not what this planet needs. The one thing I learned a long time ago as a maritime type is that in many ways, the Earth is a single ship moving through the vastness of space, and there are no lifeboats.
Very true. Now, can you say a little bit about the sector in maritime archaeology that you're most affiliated with?
The sector in maritime archaeology that I'm most affiliated with is shipwrecks, but that doesn't mean I don't get interested and participate in projects in others. That's included work on shipyard sites, because it's just as fascinating to see where ships are born, but I've also worked in ship graveyards, not shipwrecks, but places where old ships go to not necessarily die, but disappear. That's fascinating. And so much of the early work I did in San Francisco truly was a graveyard of all the ships that came during the gold rush, that at the end of the rush, they weren't going to go back to sea. So they parked them in one side of the cove and started to tear them apart, but left big chunks and pieces of them, and in a couple of cases, partly intact ships. So there's that aspect that I've also been interested in. But I've also been interested in not just shipwrecks or ship graveyards and derelicts, old abandoned vessels. I've also been interested in maritime culture. That is what we say, what we write, what we do, how we feel about all of these things are encapsulated in a shipwreck. So, yes, I'm a maritime and a ship-focused person, but with that, I see how that one aspect of sea-going, lake-going, river-going craft have been one of the most influential aspects of all of human history, as well as one of our most profound cultural icons.
What is the difference between a maritime archaeologist and a maritime historian?
Well, interestingly enough, I guess I could say I'm both. While I worked in archaeology for a number of years, my master's degree was in maritime history, with an emphasis on underwater research, as they called it. My PhD was in archaeology, so I have advanced degrees in both. Historians take the documentary record, oral tradition, the standing buildings in a way, and write accounts of human history. Archaeologists draw from the physical record, though a number of archaeologists also will draw on the written record. Part of it's not a split, but where the two disciplines diverge is one largely focuses on what people say about themselves. What the other side does is what people reveal about themselves by that which they've left behind. So for me, it's always been fun to merge those two together. Anthropology played a strong role in developing archaeology, and so a number of archaeologists also don't look at things in terms of how it relates to history. Maritime archaeology also looks at this question of human behavior and how the physical record, the material record, as we call it, speaks to aspects of who we are as human beings. So that's a bit different than what we say we are or what we do. But it's also a key aspect of maritime archaeology. And what I like, having the 2 degrees, is just how fascinating it is when they work together. And that's what I like. I don't know, maybe when I retire, I'm going to go back and get my PhD in maritime history so I could really mix it up more. But who knows? Get the wrong advisor and they're going to say, you need to forget everything you knew about archaeology. And it's like, nope. Or that being said, when I got the PhD in archaeology, nobody said, you got to forget everything you knew about history. It was, you just need to look at the other evidence and the other perspectives. And hey, isn't that an important lesson for life? The more you know about other perspectives, even if you don't agree with them, you can understand them.
Exactly. So are there any particular experiences or shipwrecks that you want to highlight in your career?
Wow, this is almost like saying, who's your best friend, right? Because there are so many. I've worked on over 100 shipwrecks around the world. Each of them is special. Many of them are unique. Some of them are very powerful, and for different reasons. Whether it's the warships that I've worked on, where there's been tremendous, and I mean tremendous in scale, loss of life, to vessels that are iconic, that were symbols of something in the past, to wrecks that speak to the best of human behavior with dramatic rescues, to wrecks that reflect incredible tragedy, to wrecks that reflect crime. Clotilda, as the last slave ship, is certainly one of the most consequential shipwrecks I've ever been involved with, and it profoundly affected me and still has meaning. I mean, the pain of those descendants, the pain of those who went through that ordeal is magnified so many fold when you begin to understand thousands of ships for hundreds of years and millions of people. And to have been in that wreck and in that hold that survives with the actual physical evidence of that voyage and the crime that was committed, I'll never get over that. It's just as I'll never get over diving at Dora-Mittelbau, the Nazi concentration camp in the Harz Mountains in an old series of mines where they built V1s and V2s, and which are now flooded, and diving those with everything perfectly preserved in ice cold, chemically laced water, fresh water, with paint, with fraying books lying on desks, with the tools used by the enslaved concentration camp inmates. That to diving Arizona and seeing fire hoses that dropped as the crew fighting fires to save their ship were literally vaporized when the blast came. Those kinds of moments, to ground zero with the atomic bomb tests at Bikini and seeing what a small nuclear weapon does right up close, even decades after the fact, to so many others, even unnamed ships, where you see that it's a fishing vessel. And long before The Perfect Storm was written or the movie was made, understanding from working in coastal communities, with so much of the world's food coming, in terms of protein, coming from the sea and lakes and rivers, that industry is so important. To this day, tens of thousands of people die in the fisheries industry and boats go missing. And it's just a reminder of ordinary lives working in a profession that means so much to the rest of us, which is literally out of sight and out of mind for most people. Whether you go to a fish counter or you get a pack of fish sticks out of the freezer, somebody went out and caught that. And more often than not, in a number of cases, they had to go out, but there was no guarantee that they'd come back. And so when I've seen a fishing vessel on the bottom, it's a powerful reminder. To Conestoga, where in finding this lost U.S. Navy tug from 1921, we realized ours were the first eyes to see it. And that with that, ultimately, we were able not just solve a long-standing mystery, but bring closure to families. That's another one. So yeah, I mean, and I could go on for probably 10 podcasts on all these wrecks, but yeah, those are some of the ones out of so many.
I appreciate those insights and the way that wrecks are so emotional. The rest of us sort of live vicariously through the people who are actually doing that work and seeing those wrecks and experiencing those emotions and bringing those emotions to us as well. So we are also touched.
Thank you. Well, I think it's important. I mean, the number of families and people I've talked to through the years who've also been touched by these stories, whose families have had these stories that have been passed along, even if nobody died on that ship, just knowing that's my grandfather's ship. With the find of Stewart, I mean, talking to one of my very best friends in San Francisco, being reminded that his wife was the granddaughter of one of the captains of the Stewart. Again, our connections to the maritime world are far more profound and diverse than I think most of us realize. You may live in the heart of the country, but the people next door to you may have had grandpa served in World War II in the Navy or was in the Merchant Marine, or that person next to you is actually a veteran of more recent wars or has gone to sea. So it's more, even in the heartland of a country, than, shall we say, just finding that your connection to the sea is going and having a meal at Red Lobster.
Exactly. What would you say to people who are really interested in coming into the field, either professionally or as a citizen scientist, or the young people today?
The number one bit of advice I give, particularly to young people, and 2 days ago I was talking to an 11-year-old, one of a couple of younger emerging scholars. There's another one who's also about that same age, lives up in the Northwest. This young man and his family are in Chicago. Smart, absolutely smart, brilliant. It gives you hope, absolutely, for the future. Intelligent questions, probing minds. I expect that if I'm around in 20 years, they're going to be colleagues. But the advice I always give is, if you have the passion, keep at it. Don't give up. You may find that the path that you set upon may vary a bit. I mean, I thought I would do one type of archaeology, ended up in another. But before that, I mean, particularly with my dad asking me pointedly at the dinner table, how are you going to make a living out of this? Well, maybe I could get hired at a museum. Ultimately, I ended up being hired by the National Park Service after working in a couple of museums, and there it went. But to that end, being open to learning, being open to new paths, knowing your course and sailing it, but also understanding that there might be an island that you stop on along the way. And maybe that's where you settle, and maybe that's not, and you keep going. But also understanding, and particularly for maritime folks, that it takes a crew, that you're not alone. Joshua Slocum may have sailed the world solo and a couple of other people, but that's not how to do it. So those things, plus, I mean, my favorite, read. Read some more and then read again. This is just some of the books here, and I've read them all. And I stress that to younger folks. It doesn't matter whether you read it electronically or you've got the physical book in your hand, but read, because you never know enough and you've never stopped learning. Life is a lifelong journey of learning, if I think you're open to it. And I say that being married to a librarian because Anne, of course, early on introduced me to the concept that libraries are centers for lifelong learning.
With that, sort of do a little recap of where you are in your career now and where you might see yourself headed.
Well, at this stage, I'm not getting close to the end of my career, but I'm in the later stages of my career. I've been at this now, if you count the first dig I went on at 14, I've been at it for 52 years. If you count being hired by the National Park Service at 20 as the start of my full-blown professional career, yeah, then I've been at it for 46 years. I still have lots of energy. I still am not ready to either stop learning, to stop going out and seeing new sites and participating in projects. But where I like the point of the voyage that I'm at the most is that through all of those years, not only have I learned, but I've gained friends and colleagues who mean the world to me. Very good, profound friendships, projects that we've worked on together. And with that, the best part of it now is that those friends and colleagues are progressively younger, meaning that as we're working together, the time will come when I'm gone, but they'll still be working on these things and learning new aspects and sharing that with folks. And that's exciting because there's always more that will emerge from the evidence or from a new perspective. So I'm excited by that. I'm also excited by the fact, quite frankly, that at this stage in my career, because of the relationships I have, the friendships I've formed, because of the things I've seen, because of the library, all of that, that I'm able to help younger colleagues. That's the best part of it. Years ago, I was told that to truly pay back what you were given when you were younger is to pay it forward. And I really strongly believe in that. I have all the time for younger colleagues. I stay in touch with all of my colleagues who are my age, but I'm also actively engaging and not just providing advice, but providing wherever I can an introduction, encouraging them to go for opportunities and occasionally putting a good word in.
Yes, that's a great way to end the episode, Jim, because coming back and sharing what you've learned with others, with colleagues, with the public, with the younger generation. I know you're very invested in the younger generation, helping them decide on their own career paths where appropriate.
Absolutely. So maybe I'll close then with this, because another older gentleman that I knew and a very dear and close friend who's now gone used to say at the end of our show, now it's your turn to get up off that couch. Go out into the mountains, go into the deserts, go into the oceans. You'll never find a better adventure. Amen, Clive Cussler.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you again, Jim, for being here. It has been another fascinating time with you. So appreciate your time. And we look forward to, at some point in the future, having you back again on Fascinated by Shipwrecks.
Likewise, thank you.
In the deep, the answers hide. Echoes of the past call out. Whispers from beneath the waves. What secrets do the shadows keep? Do we dare disturb their sleep?